On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima when a single bomb destroyed the entire city in seconds. He was 3 kilometers from the blast center. The explosion ruptured his eardrums, blinded him temporarily, and covered the left side of his body in severe burns. He spent the night in a shelter, surrounded by people dying from injuries he couldn't comprehend. The next morning, despite his wounds, he made his way to the train station. He needed to get home to Nagasaki. To his wife and infant son. On August 9, Tsutomu reported to work at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki. His supervisor didn't believe his description of what had happened in Hiroshima. One bomb destroying an entire city? Impossible. They were still arguing when the second atomic bomb detonated. Tsutomu Yamaguchi became the only person in human history officially recognized to have survived both atomic bomb attacks. This is his story. Not just about survival, but about what it means to witness the worst thing humanity has ever done. Twice. And to spend the rest of your life trying to make sure it never happens again. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was 29 years old in August 1945. He worked as a naval engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, designing oil tankers. He was married to Hisako, and they had a 3-month-old son named Katsutoshi. On August 6, Tsutomu was finishing a 3-month business assignment in Hiroshima. It was his last day. He was supposed to return to Nagasaki that evening. At 8:15 a.m., he was walking to the Mitsubishi shipyard when he saw an American B-29 bomber in the sky. He'd seen them before. Air raid sirens were common. But this time there was no siren. The bomber dropped something. Tsutomu saw it falling. A single object with a parachute. Then the sky turned white. Tsutomu later described it as if the sun had fallen to earth. The blast wave hit him like a wall. It threw him into a potato patch. When he regained consciousness, his first thought was that he'd been hit directly by a bomb. But that didn't make sense. He was alive. People hit directly by bombs don't survive. He stood up. The city was gone. Buildings that had been there seconds ago were now rubble. The sky was black. Ash was falling like snow. And everywhere, people were screaming. Tsutomu's left side was burned. His shirt had been burned away. The skin on his left arm and face felt like it was on fire. But he could walk. He made his way to a shelter, an air raid tunnel dug into a hillside. Inside were dozens of people with injuries far worse than his. People with skin hanging from their bodies. People bleeding from their eyes and ears. People begging for water. Tsutomu spent the night in that shelter. He had no medical training. No supplies. All he could do was sit with the dying and try to comprehend what had happened. In the morning, he left the shelter. He needed to get home. His wife didn't know if he was alive. He walked through the ruins to Hiroshima Station. The journey that normally took 20 minutes took over 3 hours. Every street was blocked with debris. Bodies were everywhere. Some were burned beyond recognition. Others looked almost peaceful, as if they'd simply laid down to sleep. Tsutomu later said the hardest part wasn't the destruction. It was the silence. After the initial chaos, the city became quiet. No birds. No insects. Just the sound of wind moving through ash. Tsutomu reached Hiroshima Station around noon on August 7. The station was damaged but trains were running. Japan's rail system was remarkably resilient. Even in the aftermath of the atomic bomb, they were trying to maintain service. The train to Nagasaki was packed with survivors. People with bandaged faces. People who could barely walk. People in shock, staring at nothing. Tsutomu found a seat by a window. His burns were agonizing. Every movement sent pain through his left side. But he was alive. And he was going home. The journey took overnight. Normally it was a 6-hour trip. But with damaged tracks and multiple stops, it stretched to nearly 20 hours. Tsutomu didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the white flash. Heard the screaming. When the train finally arrived in Nagasaki on the morning of August 8, Tsutomu went straight home. Hisako was shocked when she saw him. His face was swollen and burned. His clothes were torn and covered in ash. But he was alive. She cried. Held him carefully, avoiding his burns. Tsutomu told her what happened. About the bomb. About the city disappearing. Hisako had heard reports, but the full reality was beyond comprehension. That night, Tsutomu slept in his own bed for the first time in 3 months. Despite the pain, despite the trauma, he felt grateful. He'd survived something unsurvivable. He'd made it home. The next morning, August 9th, Tsutomu did something that seems incomprehensible now. He went to work. His burns needed treatment. He should have been in a hospital. But Tsutomu believed in duty. He reported to the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki at 8 a.m. His supervisor, a man named Akira Iwanaga, asked about his injuries. Tsutomu explained. He'd been in Hiroshima when the new bomb fell. The atomic bomb. One bomb that destroyed the entire city. Akira didn't believe him. He said it was impossible. No single bomb could do that much damage. Tsutomu must have been confused. Maybe hit his head. The American propaganda was claiming they'd used a new weapon, but it was clearly exaggerated. They were arguing when, at 11:02 a.m., the sky turned white again. Tsutomu knew exactly what was happening. He'd seen it before. 3 days ago. He threw himself to the ground and covered his head. The blast wave shattered every window in the building. Glass and debris flew through the air. The explosion was even closer this time. The Mitsubishi shipyard was only 3 kilometers from the Nagasaki blast center. When the shaking stopped, Tsutomu stood up. Akira, his supervisor, was standing there in shock. Blood running from cuts on his face. Staring at the mushroom cloud rising over the city. Tsutomu said, "That's what I was trying to tell you." Then he ran. He needed to get home. His wife and son were out there somewhere in that destruction. The journey back took hours. The city was chaos. People running in every direction. Buildings collapsing. Fires spreading. Tsutomu pushed through the panic. His burns from Hiroshima were screaming with pain. His ears were ringing from the second blast. But he kept moving. He reached his neighborhood around 2 p.m. His house was still standing. The structure was damaged, but it hadn't collapsed. He found Hisako and Katsutoshi in the wreckage of what had been their living room. They were injured but alive. Hisako had shielded their son with her body when the blast hit. Tsutomu held them both and cried. In the days that followed, Tsutomu learned the scope of what had happened. Hiroshima, August 6, approximately 140,000 dead. Nagasaki, August 9, approximately 70,000 dead. He'd been at ground zero for both. And he'd survived. The radiation exposure alone should have killed him. The burns should have become infected. The trauma should have destroyed his mind. But he survived. In the weeks after the bombings, Tsutomu developed radiation sickness. His hair fell out. He vomited constantly. His burns became infected. Doctors told Hisako to prepare for him to die. But he didn't die. Slowly, impossibly, he recovered. By October 1945, he was well enough to return to work. He spent the next 40 years working as an engineer. Living a quiet life. Raising his son. Trying to forget what he'd seen. But in 1957, something happened that made forgetting impossible. Tsutomu's daughter, born after the war, died of cancer at age 4. Doctors said it was likely caused by radiation exposure in the womb. Hisako had been pregnant when the Nagasaki bomb fell. They hadn't known. The radiation had affected their unborn child. For 50 years, Tsutomu Yamaguchi rarely spoke about what happened to him. In Japan, atomic bomb survivors, called hibakusha, faced discrimination. People feared radiation was contagious. Employers wouldn't hire them. Potential marriage partners rejected them. Many survivors, including Tsutomu, kept their status secret to avoid stigma. But in 2005, something changed. Tsutomu was 86 years old. He'd outlived most of the people who'd been in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He'd survived cancer twice, likely caused by radiation exposure. And he realized he was running out of time to tell his story. He contacted the Japanese government and requested official recognition as a double hibakusha. Someone who'd survived both bombings. The government was skeptical at first. The odds of surviving both attacks were astronomical. But Tsutomu had documentation. Medical records from both cities. Witness testimony. Employment records showing he'd been transferred from Hiroshima back to Nagasaki on August 8. In 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as the only person confirmed to have survived both atomic bombings. He was 90 years old. Once his story became public, journalists from around the world wanted to interview him. Film directors wanted to make documentaries. But Tsutomu wasn't interested in fame. He had a message. And he used every interview, every platform, to repeat it. He said nuclear weapons are not abstract political tools. They're not deterrents or necessary evils. They're instruments that cause suffering beyond human comprehension. He described watching a mother try to breastfeed a baby, not realizing the baby was already dead. He described people walking like ghosts, their skin hanging from their arms, begging for water. He described the smell. Burning flesh and hair. A smell that stayed in his nostrils for years. He said the world treats Hiroshima and Nagasaki like historical events. Like data points in a textbook. But they weren't events. They were people. 210,000 people who died screaming. Who melted. Who vaporized. Whose shadows were burned into walls. Tsutomu told American documentary filmmaker that he didn't hate America. He didn't hate the pilots who dropped the bombs. They were following orders. But he hated the idea that nuclear weapons could ever be justified. That 210,000 deaths could be acceptable collateral damage. He said the only thing that kept him alive after losing his daughter was the belief that by surviving, by bearing witness, he could help prevent it from happening again. That his suffering had to mean something. In his final interview, given in December 2009, just weeks before his death, Tsutomu Yamaguchi said something that haunts everyone who heard it. He said that surviving both bombs wasn't a miracle. It was a curse. A responsibility he never asked for but couldn't escape. He said for 64 years, he'd carried the memories of two cities dying. He'd watched the same nightmare twice. Seen the same flash. Heard the same screams. Felt the same heat. And every day since, he'd wondered why he survived when so many others died. He said he used to believe he survived because he had important work to do. Because he was meant to tell the story. But as he got older, he realized there was no grand reason. He survived because he happened to be far enough from the blast centers. Because he happened to find shelter. Because of luck. Random, meaningless luck. And that made it worse. Because if his survival was random, then so were the deaths of 210,000 others. Children who died weren't less deserving of life. They were just unlucky. And that randomness, that cosmic injustice, was something Tsutomu never made peace with. In his final months, Tsutomu became obsessed with nuclear disarmament. He wrote letters to world leaders. He testified before the United Nations. He met with President Obama's advisors, begging them to understand that nuclear deterrence was a lie built on the corpses of civilians. He said the problem with nuclear weapons isn't that they might be used. It's that they were used. And the world saw the results and decided those weapons should exist anyway. That 210,000 deaths weren't enough to end the madness. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died on January 4, 2010, at age 93. The official cause of death was stomach cancer, likely caused by radiation exposure 65 years earlier. His son, Katsutoshi, the baby he'd rushed home to protect in 1945, was with him when he died. Tsutomu's final words, according to his son, were about the bombs. He said, "The next one will be worse. And there won't be any survivors to tell the story." Today, there are approximately 136,000 nuclear warheads in existence globally. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were small compared to modern weapons. The Hiroshima bomb, called Little Boy, had a yield of 15 kilotons. Modern nuclear weapons measure their yield in megatons. Thousands of times more powerful. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story isn't just about survival. It's about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. It's about whether witnessing horror is enough to prevent repeating it. He survived the unsurvivable. Twice. He spent the last years of his life begging the world to listen. And the world nodded. Offered sympathy. Built memorials. And kept the weapons.